All right, come on in, everybody. Welcome back to the Holler. TNHoller.com is where you can find us at the TN Holler on Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, Blue Sky, all that stuff. We also have these hollers hollering all across the state. Thanks to your support, we appreciate it. It really does keep us going. Chip in a few bucks a month and get a holler hat. Shout out to Abby Rubenfeld if you need a lawyer. Talk to Abby. Not a free speech lawyer, though. We got one of those today. And then if you need a home, buying or selling in Middle Tennessee, Elisa Parker. And if you need some coffee, Bongo, Java, those are all people that are very supportive of us. One person who is not supportive of us at all is Marsha Blackburn. And she has a bill called the Kids Online Safety Act, which many of you have maybe heard her talking about or seen her talking about or tweeting about and making herself look like a hero about. It is a bipartisan bill that she is co-sponsoring with Senator Blumenthal of Connecticut. And he and Marsha have been on TV the last couple of days talking about it. And there was a press conference about it. And so I've decided, you know what? Maybe it's time I finally understand what the hell this is. And to do so, we're turning to a free speech expert, ARI COHN. ARI, how are you today?
I'm great. How are you?
Good. All right. So I guess my first question, it's called the Kids Online Safety Act, and they're pitching it basically as, you know, this bill that's going to protect our kids. I think most people would agree that the general idea of protecting our kids online when social media is as prevalent as it is. I have young kids that are getting older. They're going to be dealing with this soon once they get phones, God forbid. So, you know, what are they saying this is and what is it actually? I guess those are my questions. And if you could, I know there's a lot of detail here, but, you know, talk to us like we kind of don't understand it because, you know, I think a lot of us are coming at this new.
Yeah, well, you actually hit upon something that's really important is when somebody says this bill is to protect kids, it makes it really difficult to oppose it. And it also kind of tends to turn people's brains off a little bit in terms of, okay, but it doesn't do that in a good way. Because people hear for the kids and it's like, okay, that's a great idea. Of course, everyone wants to protect kids. I want to protect kids. You want to protect kids. Nobody can argue with that. But the way this bill does it is really quite ham-fisted and ripe for abuse, which is either by oversight or by design, depending on who you're talking about, perhaps. But so the law does a couple of things, most importantly. First of all, it imposes what is called a duty of care on the platform. So what they have to do is they have to act with quote unquote reasonable care to prevent and mitigate certain harms like eating disorders, suicide, anxiety, depression, and so forth that might come from the platform. And why might those things come from the platform? Because of the things that people say on them. So, you know, one of the things we've been fighting about for the past 2 years with this bill is they say, oh, well, this has nothing to do with the content that's on the platforms. Well, that's great. But is anybody saying that, you know, being on Facebook or whatever, independent of any content, is causing people to have eating disorders? No, of course not. It is because of the content that people think causes eating disorders that appears on the platform that says on the news feed or, you know, served up by the algorithm. And, you know, I'm going to I'll take the problems one by one with the parts of the bill. This is the most dangerous part of this bill for a few reasons. One, every kid is different. Kids are not all the same. They all react to content differently. They all have different life experiences that platforms have absolutely no way of knowing about. And frankly, as a general matter, if you don't trust social media platforms, putting them in charge of looking out for the best interests of kids is crazy. Absolutely insane. You can't have it both ways. You can't say these are bad platforms that are out to make money over kids' health and then put them in charge of kids' health. It doesn't make any sense. But especially because minors as a group range from 1-year-old to 17 years old. A 17-year-old and say a 14-year-old have extremely different levels of maturity, can handle different types of content. How are platforms supposed to know which kid is going to react which way, or create a solution that protects all kids, which doesn't really exist because kids are individual people. They can't. It's impossible. So what are they going to do instead? They're going to cut off access to any content that could be potentially remotely sensitive, controversial, that someone could claim down the line cause some kid harm. And that includes a lot of protected speech and can be weaponized. So the agency that's going to enforce this duty of care is Federal Trade Commission. Well, a lot of people that are going to be running the Federal Trade Commission in the very near future think that LGBTQ content causes kids to be anxious and depressed. And they might very well say, you have to not let kids see this kind of content. You can't promote it in the algorithms. Maybe you can't even put it in their news feeds because it's going to cause these kids to have anxiety. It's going to cause them to have eating disorders. What have
I mean, we're on some level, we're already seeing this with the book bans in a physical form. So you're talking about basically the digital version of these book bans that are
precisely.
Yeah.
And so, it's really prone to abuse, and it can be abused by whoever is sitting in the FTC at any particular time. It can be weaponized against left-leaning content. It can be weaponized against right-leaning content. The possibilities are unfortunately endless. The
next FTC chair I just saw is this guy who his pitch to become chair was basically, him telling Trump what a loyalist he was going to be and, how he agrees with him on everything. And so, it does seem like, that kind of power in his hands would be dangerous.
Exactly. And it's dangerous in anyone's hands, just to be clear. But, one of the other pieces of the KOSA puzzle that really impacts all of us is how do you determine, and because the second part of KOSA requires the platforms to have certain default settings and safeguards for accounts that are known to be used by minors. How do we know which accounts are minors and which accounts are not? To do that, you have to figure out who is behind each account, which means age verifying every single account. Now, KOSA says in a paragraph, we are not required, this should not be construed to require age verification. Really, the only reason you would put that in a bill is if the rest of the bill makes it very clear that it really does require age verification. There's no reason to say this is not that unless it really is that. And the reason it is because there are so many potential, avenues for liability. For the duty of care, the FTC can come after you. For the default safeguards, not just the FTC, state attorneys general can go after you.
Who is you? Is you the platform?
The platform, yeah. So there's no reasonable course of action here other than age verifying all the users, because you really want to CYA. You really want to make sure you are not screwing this up at all. So what are you going to do? You're going to age verify all of your users. You're going to collect their identification information. You're going to figure out who they are, and if they are who they say they are, if you really want to be, in depth about it. And what does that do? Well, first of all, huge problem in terms of data security. That creates just a treasure trove of information that bad actors would love to get their hands on. And hackers will eventually get their hands on. You saw just in recent months the billion pieces of identity information that were hacked from one identity company. The 404 Media report about the age verification vendor that got hacked is going to get into bad actors' hands. It can also get into bad government actors' hands. If you're a dissenter, if you want somebody speaking out against power, governments would love to know that your account belongs to X person at Y address if they want to go after them. And that might sound crazy, but it actually happens in the real world, especially if you live in an authoritarian regime, or just there's a rogue government agent who wants to make your life difficult. It's a real big risk. And one of the essential founding principles of this nation has been anonymous speech. The Federalist Papers were written anonymously. And, we have the right to speak out when we feel the most free from potential official retribution. And that is when we're anonymous, when people can't figure out who we are and we can really speak truth to power. without risking our liberty, our life, or official repercussions, which we shouldn't face anyways, but unfortunately we sometimes do.
So, Marsha being a sponsor of this, I obviously will freely admit, colors me one particular way about it and has me very skeptical. She is a co-sponsor of Senator Blumenthal, who, I don't know much about him. I do know that he suddenly is saying that Elon Musk is like the king of free speech, which has me questioning his judgment also. But it does seem like there are some like good faith actors that believe in this, right? So, is there some positive aspect to what they're trying to do?
Well, in a broad sense, yes, because like we said, who can argue with protecting kids? That is the good faith thing we can all agree on, is that it is good to protect children. The problem is, are we going to protect children by violating their rights, by violating adults' rights all at once? Or are we going to do the hard work of figuring out how to reach the solution in a more reasonable and thoughtful way? And the problem with legislation too frequently is that it's much less wanting to do the hard work and much more wanting to get on TV and get the headlines and get the things that we can fundraise off and campaign on and all that. We have, I personally, both in my current position and my former position, have been trying to explain the problems with KOSA to its sponsors and to its supporters for 2 years now. And every time it's either, no, that's not a problem. Are you crazy? Or B, sure, we fixed that. And really it's a superficial change that would fool someone who doesn't really know how the law works to a really great degree. But to anyone looking at it who knows how things work, is lipstick on a pig. So there's this reticence to actually doing the hard work of fixing it. And I don't think KOSA can be fixed. I think if we want to come up with a good solution, we got to start from scratch. Protecting kids is great, but violating free speech rights is not great. It's not the way to do it.
Do you have a sense of like what you think a better idea would be? And I should point out that as you're saying that, you're not alone. ACLU also thinks that the passage of this bill would hurt free speech. So, do you have a sense of what you think a better solution would be, or at least a general idea?
It's difficult. If I had all these great solutions, I'd be president or whatever, right. But a few ideas that I think are really, that people kind of discount as, oh, that's not going to work, but we think we should really give a hard look at is digital literacy. It's really easy to say that, oh, all these harms are coming from online content, but are we teaching kids how to deal with online content appropriately? Do we have the educational programs in place? Because also, just as a somewhat of an aside, a lot of these proposals that you see popping up here and there, some of them would ban kids from social media entirely until they're 17.
Well, that's what I was going to ask, because didn't Australia just do that? Is that, you think, maybe
I think that is a really terrible idea.
Okay.
Imagine you turn 18 years old and you are thrown onto social media, the Wild West, for the very first time in your life. We laugh about people getting fooled by, obvious scams like the Nigerian prince scheme or whatever. If you're getting thrown on social media, you have no way of sussing out scams, or B, just having that general sense of how the online information ecosystem works, so you can discern what's true from what's not.
But like at some point, you're going to have to be there for the first time.
Yeah.
At some age will have to be your first age, right? So what is the good age? I mean, as a parent, I'm trying to figure that out now. I have an 8-year-old, I have a 5-year-old. Pretty sure that's not the age. They're not on social media yet. But, at some point we have to decide what the right age is, right?
And I think one of the best people to do that is the parent, because each parent knows their kid. They know how developmentally developmentally far they are down the line.
Sure.
They know what their kid can handle, what their kid cannot. And I'm not saying this is easy. I sympathize with parents. It has gotten increasingly difficult to actually figure out what your kid is doing and keep them from doing stuff. I completely sympathize with that. But parenting is hard work. It's always hard work. And we just, we kind of do our best. And that's one of the other solutions I think is actually worth exploring, is finding ways to make it easier for parents to make these decisions for their own families. Whether that's education campaigns directed towards parents to figure out how to use parental controls and things like that, or something else. I think the more we can do to empower parents to help make these decisions for themselves, they're always going to have the better information about their particular families. And we need to trust parents, and we need to empower parents. But what we don't need is for government to be parenting kids for us.
Right. That makes sense. And, I saw that there was some sort of board that they're trying to put together. Like, what is this bureaucracy board that they're going to entrust with making these decisions?
Well, so there's the Kids Online Safety Council, which is an advisory board to Congress that issues a couple of reports and has representatives from the platforms and people who have experience, quote unquote, with social media or child psychology or what have you.
Yeah, it really is out great.
Right.
And I think it's worth pointing out, this isn't about like, a lot of stuff is already illegal, right? This isn't about like green lighting abuse and green lighting, trafficking and green lighting, porn and that kind of thing, right? Like a lot of that stuff is they're already tasked with policing that on their own sites, and the ones that aren't, you shouldn't be on anyway. So, on some level, this is really like a more general thing that we're talking about here, right?
Yeah, it's very vague, very broad. We're going to say that platforms are now liable if they do things that result in harm to minors. Well, yes, the internet isn't entirely safe. The internet will never be entirely safe. Crossing the street will never be entirely safe. We have to do what we can, but also not fool ourselves into thinking that we can legislate our way into complete safety, because that has burned us over and over and over again in different contexts.
One of the things that we know being in Tennessee is that everything Marsha Blackburn does, she does for her own personal agenda and, usually on someone else's behalf. Who do you think is pulling the strings here and why?
It's hard to say, because this is one of the reasons why this is such a difficult issue, is because there is such broad support for the idea that we should do something, and that something must be done impulse is so dangerous, because it usually goes, something must be done. This is something, therefore we must do this. And that is just, that's not how, reality works, but that's how the human psyche sometimes works. I think there's a lot of different areas that pressure comes from this. There's obviously kids advocacy groups and places that deal with parents who are understandably grieving if their kid has been harmed or has harmed themselves, and we should never not show compassion for parents who do have kids that were harmed. It is a real thing. Kids do get hurt sometimes, and that's not there's no shame in acknowledging that. It doesn't hurt anything. We should acknowledge it. And there's also the pressures of being in elected office, where you need something that grabs people's attention and say, look, I'm doing something.
Right. Marsha needs something she can put in her newsletter. Right.
There's untold number of pressures
protecting your kids. It sounds good. It does sound good.
It does sound great. Yeah.
Yeah.
I would love to be able to point to random people and say, ha, I protected your child.
Right.
I feel like a hero over and over and over again.
Right. Well, that's probably what's going to happen. And where does it stand, just before I let you go? Like, what's the current status of it?
So over this weekend, the sponsors released new language to try and address some of the concerns, the free speech concerns especially. Of course, like I said, every single change to this bill has actually failed to address any concern, and this one was no different. It was superficial lipstick on a pig. Fortunately, there seems to be very little appetite in the House of Representatives to take this up this year. Speaker Mike Johnson has said, we want to keep kids safe, but we want to do it right. So we are going to, re-examine this in the next session, and we're going to take a look on how to do it and how to do it right. And if Speaker Johnson can come up with a new idea that doesn't threaten, the rights of kids and adults alike, I would be thrilled to see it. I hope that somebody is out there, really wanting to dig in and do the hard work of thoughtful legislating. Because, people say nobody wants to work anymore, and sometimes it feels like that when you're looking at these bills that are so obviously problematic. That who wrote this. So, I hope that somebody out there is really trying to figure out a good solution, because it's an important issue. And, just because we've only had bad ideas so far doesn't mean there isn't a good one down the line.
All right, just one last thing. I just want to get you to react to this Blumenthal quote.
Really should appeal to advocates of free expression in the First Amendment, such as it has to Elon Musk, who's the foremost champion of free speech in the tech industry.
Elon Musk is the foremost champion of free speech in the tech industry, according to Senator Blumenthal. Ari, is that true?
What I will say is Elon Musk could implement 3/4 of the things in the Kids Online Safety Act voluntarily if he wanted to, if he really thought it was such a great idea. If he really believes in it, why hasn't he done that? That makes you question whether platform support, and there are other platforms that have expressed some support for this bill. You have to wonder whether that is a true belief that this makes kids safer, or if it's an attempt to impose regulatory burdens on competitors that might have less money to deal with it. It just makes you wonder.
All right, Ari, thanks for jumping on here, telling us about this. Really appreciate it. At ARI COHN on Twitter. I think you're on some of the other platforms too, so you can find him there. He's a free speech.
I have a pretty easy to find name.
Yes, pretty easy to find name. Thanks for coming on, man. Appreciate it.
My pleasure. Anytime.
All right, take care. So that's Ari. This is the Kids Online Safety Act that Marsha is talking about a lot right now, and she's been talking about this for a while. I just kind of wanted to hear more about what it is. And again, like we just said, sounds great. Kids online safety, important, but it's always impossible to see Marsha doing something and not feel like there's some sort of alternate motive going on. And maybe it's unfair. I mean, maybe I need to be like, you know what, when Marsha gets it right, get behind her. But it's really hard for me to believe that something else isn't going on here. And when Blumenthal gets out there and says, oh, Elon is the champion of free speech, it just gives me the heebie-jeebies and makes me question what's going on. So hopefully you understood a little bit more than you did before we started, and appreciate you following as always. tnholler.com. We'll see you next time.